Welcome, everybody, and welcome to Eureka Tuesday number 249. We're extremely happy to have all of you here tonight. We are also, of course, happy to have everyone watching online. And last but not least, we are very happy to welcome you, Felipe De Ferrari, on behalf of your office, invited by Professor Bru. As always, we are keen to hear whatever we're being presented with, and then to discuss together. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and we will come over and hand a microphone over to you. The same goes to our digital viewers. Of course, you can use the YouTube live chat as well as the Telegram channel to post questions online, and we will read them out loud in this room. So I hope everyone's going to be having a great time, and I hand over the word to Professor Bru for a short introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe, to be here. It's a pleasure. And me and you, we are very happy to now to invite you because first, Felipe is curious. He's questioning always architecture through their practice. And I could say, Felipe, he acts. And that is very important. And after, for me, Felipe has two life, two personality. The first as co-founder of OnArchitecture. I don't know if you know OnArchitecture, but I invite you to see this audiovisual archive architectural online. It's a precious tools. It's a collection of building portrait, architect, artist, curator, researchers, landscape architect, urban designer, portrait. And I think he start in 28, perhaps, around the okay, but is a precious memory. The second live of Felipe is with PLAN COMÚN, with Kim Courage. I don't want to do an error with Sacha Discourse and Nissim Agenauer. I think it's just important to say that PLAN COMÚN was founded in Santiago 1 year before, or no, after, sorry, the movement of students against the inequality of neoliberal culture. I think it's important. And now you are based in Paris. We will want to know why. But we like your practice, you like your work because, of course, you design, you build, but you do take a research as a practice, and finally you have critical discourse, and that is more important for us. Then Felipe talked. At the international, the PLAN COMÚN participe at several Biennale, Trienale in Lisbon, in Sao Paulo at the international, and they win a famous and difficult project in Paris, à L'Eau Petit à Saint-Vincent-de-Paul in France, and we are happy to have Felipe with us. Thank you.
Yeah, Stefan. Is it working? No. Yes. No. Okay, perfect. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Stephanie, and the introduction. It's a very, very kind. And I'm really happy. Hi, Marcus. I'm very happy to be here in this institution, and hopefully we can share some ideas by the end of the presentation. I will go directly straight forward to the presentation. There are many. I will show you, let's say, the life of these two projects very fast. A lot of projects, a lot of slides. So I will start immediately. The presentation is entitled Architecture as a Common Field of Knowledge. It's not. Okay. So basically, just to, in a way, summarize what Stephanie was saying in the introduction, I'm co-founder of two projects which are running in parallel and which has been feeding each other in a way. On the one side, this archive of architecture entitled called OnArchitecture, a student project we founded with another two Chilean architects when we were still students back in 2007 or something like that, with Diego Graz and Sebastián Paredes. And then in 2012, we changed the name and we somehow changed the model of the archive. I will tell you more about that afterwards. And then on the other side, the practice, which is PLAN COMÚN. Both projects, in a way, were co-founded at the same moment. And we like to believe, actually, that everything is a project. Everything is a potential project of architecture. So we are quite open in the way we see architecture. From time, of course, we design. We believe in the strategic thinking by architecture. From time to time, we have the possibility to build. We do research, we teach from time to time also, and we are doing editorial and curatorial production. In a way, this idea of architecture is a common field of knowledge I will introduce in this presentation is related with the many, many inputs we have received by many architects since we are practicing, but also before. These are the two projects. On the one side, you can see a grid of videos, a grid of people and works, and on the other side, a grid of, or not necessarily a grid, but a selection of projects, both together. I will start briefly with OnArchitecture. OnArchitecture is an audiovisual archive of architecture that we founded in 2012, as I said. At the moment, we have more than 600 videos introducing many, I would say, ideas, discourses and positions about architecture, but not only about the space, about built environment, and so on and so forth. This is the site. Can discuss later about this. But perhaps the most important thing to say about OnArchitecture is that it was founded as a student project, which is quite important. You might know that in Chile there was this discourse that we were the periphery when we were students. Some professors were saying that we were the periphery, we were far from the cultural production in Europe or in North America, and we were not totally convinced about this idea. Of course, we were learning from local practices such as Peso Bonelrichhausen, for example, a very important practice for us in the south of Chile. And at one moment we said, what if we bring more inputs, right, from different voices around the world and different positions, because some of them, they are quite into theory, some others into building, and so on and so forth. But there are many voices together. Some of them, they are more strong in conceptual terms. Some of them, they are much more interested in dealing with urban questions. Some of them are really into editorial or curatorial processes. So everything is somehow in this collection or constellation of people, which is bringing this idea of the architecture as a common field of knowledge. We visit buildings many times, as all the architects. We go to the sites, and we are not doing sketches nor taking pictures, but actually we film the buildings since the very beginning. OnArchitecture started with this visiting buildings and filming them in a very rough way when we were still students. And then at one moment we changed our, let's say, language, very basic, by the way, to film still takes, showing the life of the buildings in any condition, I would say. And we were having this experience, in very inspiring moments. And as we spend a lot of time, in a way, filming, we know a little bit more about the conditions of these projects and so on and so forth. we were also, yeah, and of course, these are, I will show you just a couple of projects, but there are cultural centers, architecture schools, houses at one moment, of course, quite important as a subject, the domestic environment. And I will say during the last 5 years, I personally, I'm very into collective housing, I will say. So we started to film and to visit a lot of these buildings, experiences by other people, by other architects, other practices in Europe, in Latin America, it doesn't matter. And to see the potentials, no? The potentials about to live together, about the collectivity, about how to introduce different programs, different uses, and also actually to try to understand the conditions of these projects, right? It's not only when talking about, for example, the extra space or the approach by Lacaton and Basal, Drouot, Houtin, these French practices, it's not only to understand the spatial, let's say, condition of these very nice extra spaces, but actually we want to read all the conditions, political, social, economical, all the questions that are somehow synthesized in these devices, right? And I can continue. This is another very good example. I will strongly recommend you to have a look. La Col collective in Barcelona. This is La Borda cooperative. The three architects you are seeing there, Paul, Cristina, and Carles, they are living also in this cooperative, so they know the behavior of their own building in a way, quite interesting. Or recently, for example, this huge, massive housing complex in Chile for 424 families, a very, well, in a quite difficult situation. Let's say social housing is quite much more fragile in Chile than probably in Europe, but you can see also, you can understand the scale, but also the conditions why this project appeared. From time to time, we have the possibility to introduce the videos in physical exhibitions, not only in the digital world, let's say. On the one side, you can see one presentation by Lacaton and Basal in Venice Biennial, I think it was in 2018. That image, and on the other side, the TVs, it was an exhibition, our first exhibition in Paris, only showing our videos. We are also interested in dealing with different formats. It means that from time to time, the content we produce in video, then it gets a new life in, for example, printed media, or also in some public programs, you could say, conference program. And I will introduce this. I refer normally to these two, actually, because they are somehow, yeah, quite the same in a way. One is much more extended. It was the program I led during our last year in Chile for our school, Universidad Católica, with a lot of activities, with trying to bring again this idea that architecture is a kind of vast field with many questions. And on the other side, Campo Común, the conference program I was co-curating until this year. Let's go to PLAN COMÚN. So PLAN COMÚN was founded in 2012, and the idea since the very beginning, since we named the practice along with Diego Graz, one of the both co-founder of OnArchitecture and then PLAN COMÚN, the idea was to actually to reinforce the collective realm, the collective space through our projects. It doesn't matter in which scale, in which type of program, or which type of clients we were dealing with. The idea was to always try to take advantage of these questions and then to, in a way, to concentrate the energy in the collective aspect of these projects. So briefly, you can have an idea or more or less about the team, the difference and the emphasis in these two phases. The first one, 6 years in Santiago, pictures with all the collaborators and a couple of friends, actually. We were like 6 at that moment in 2015. And we were especially focused on public space and public facilities. We did a lot of open competitions, many in Chile, but also abroad. We were also dealing with self-commissions. And then a second phase during the last 4 years in Paris, you see Kim first in the first line, Sasha and Nisim are, let's say, the other 3 partners at this new phase. It's quite funny because the 3 of them, they went to Chile, they did their Erasmus project in Chile. So we knew each other when we were studying. not that it's not only an opportunistic approach when we decided to reestablish the practice in Paris. And I will say the focus, by coincidence or by interest, is mainly on collective housing and transformation. Perhaps what it will be interesting for you is to know which were the main ideas in Chile and then how we are trying to translate this content into a new context, right? You need to understand that the practice was founded in 2012. We were just ending our studies as in university in the School of Architecture. And then there were somehow two, I would say, two very important trends, or let's say positions, and they are more or less the same until now. On the one side, very, very extremely good architects, very skilled architects that they are somehow irritated to talk about things that are beyond architecture, social things, ecological things, political things, and so on and so forth. And on the other side, in a way, and we strongly appreciate the practices I'm quoting here. It's not at all that I want to establish a distance, but actually just to see two forms. At the time, we were dealing with the question of founding our own practice. On the other side, Vittorio Aureli, trying to bring this idea of to reclaim the relationship in between politics and architecture, let's say, form and politics. Plan Común was founded in a very specific context. As you might know, Chile is quite a neoliberal, probably the most extreme neoliberal experiment. I will not give you all the details about it, but I will just summarize the idea that neoliberalism is the common sense there until now. So this is partially changing or slowly changing, but still is quite present. It means that all the sphere of our lives are commodified, are somehow part of the market, right? And in a way, this work by Alfredo Yar, also a Chilean artist, I think it's quite clear in the way you have two readings, right? Culture is equal to capital. Capital is somehow appropriating culture, or that culture is fundamental, right? 2011, one year before the foundation of Plan Común, actually we were not part of the student movement. We finished our studies before, even though I would say we were somehow somehow leftist during our period as students. We were not part of any movement when we were studying. Actually, we were not even, Tim and I, we were not living in Chile when the revolt, the demonstration appeared. The movement, the student movement, got somehow importance. This was back in 2011. But then we saw, actually, at the moment that we were naming and giving a frame to our practice, that it was quite important for us to create a certain relationship. It's not that we wanted to have a distance with these social aspects or the things that were happening at that moment in Chile, but on the contrary, we wanted to actually to establish this relationship. And you might know actually that probably there are many architects we agree on the harsh conditions we have within the architecture field. We are at mercy of many people that is not that are not necessarily interested in design, and sometimes architects we are only mere collaborationists, as Wilfred Kuhn saying this quote. I will say this is a problem, and of course we need to react from within architecture. And again, this idea also that the freedom actually it's not related with a kind of individualism that of course was quite a trendy topic for start architects and so on and so forth during the 90s. But actually this idea of freedom, the true freedom is collective, something that we learned strongly from Lina Bobardi when we were living in Brazil. The first project I will introduce, I will show you, is a research. Actually, it's a research, a collaborative research, very long and really I would say informal. We just started as soon as we founded the practice. We started this series of common places, and we invited many people, many friends from Chile, but also from abroad. Some of the vast majority somehow of our same generation. You can see all the people there. And the question was quite direct in a way. We get used to actually to have public space as a mere leftover of the private realm, as you can see in this kind of silly diagram. And then on the other side, the idea we wanted to bring actually, how to reclaim collectiveness in our cities. This was quite in a way defined from the very beginning. The idea was to actually to have a subject, then to discuss the subject all together, like with within the team or with other contributors. Then we were writing a text, and as soon as the text was somehow clear, we were jumping to design. It was not, we were not starting from sketches, but actually from ideas, from things we wanted to reclaim for our common life in a way. The protocol was quite also simple. Sometimes I would say in most of the time it worked well. In some cases it didn't work because architects, we are also trying to go out sometimes of the rules. But anyway, this was the format. The idea was to have a very short text, just one drawing, an isometric drawing showing the condition we wanted to bring. These are contexts that are totally fiction. In a way, we were thinking the projects, and then we were creating a context in a way, because we were thinking in this as prototypes or ideas that you could translate and you can use actually in different contexts. They are not projects per se, but actually they are more strategies. This was the first one, very important, public buildings, just squares on air. This one, a contribution by Pedro Hoffman, a Chilean architect. He was thinking to really to have pools, swimming pools, really open and without any kind of boundary or, let's say, bureaucracies involved. This one by our colleagues from Umwelt, Chilean practice also. I will recommend you to have a look. They were thinking in the shopping mall or shopping center as a typology, and how to subvert somehow their context, their immediate surroundings. They are, of course, you might see some of them, you might see them in your own city. Some of them, they are direct reaction of things we were seeing through in Santiago, but also in other cities, you know. We were just trying to design some possibilities, right? So for example, in this case, you see an image of a hardcore neoliberal, let's say, densification in the center of Santiago. They are even called ghettos verticales, vertical ghettos, destroying let's say, the city center in a way, specifically in one district in Santiago, Estación Central. And then we were bringing this, for example, a strategy where we were using densification, but actually to create some obstacles and to clarify flows within our cities, right? Pedestrians and cars. Or for example, we were seeing opportunities everywhere. In this case, sidewalls. You can see this beautiful sidewall in Sao Paulo, in the Minhocao, which is a high road that goes into the city, and during the weekend it's open to just to walk. And then you have many of these sidewalls, and we were saying, what if there is something kind of a device that is taking advantage of this, somehow creates a collaboration with the existing for other uses, right? We were also having this discussion about good architecture, and we said, perhaps good architecture can resist the change of a new location, a new context somehow. We were just taking these three houses and giving them new context in whatever, in a more dense situation, transforming them in cultural centers. It doesn't matter, but subverting their condition of private houses. Or this one by Pedro Correa, another Chilean architect that was quite smart in a way. He was at the same time creating new relationships in between private plots, in between private buildings, and at the same time creating an obstacle in the flow of the streets. There is one issue, one very important issue for us that is somehow recurrent during all the years. It's about architecture as propaganda. And this idea, of course, architecture can be more literal or more subtle in the way it's communicating things, actually. And we like both, in a way, very literal from time to time, but also more subtle ways. We were, in this case, we were really interested in propaganda in the most literal sense. On the one side, you see a kind of protest where, let's say, a huge billboard is displayed in a kind of ruin, in a kind of existing building, and on the other side, a cover of a Chilean newspaper where the students of architecture were complaining about the conditions about studying architecture. And it was quite funny because they got a cover in an open general newspaper, actually. This is also something interesting for architecture. We did this in a way. We did some essays, more like projects or ideas. In this case, one very kind of old project, very also a few images and a few ideas to try to bring a common billboard into the kind of device to contribute with form in this kind of movement. This one we did, it was a workshop we did 2 years ago in Marne School of Architecture. The building is by Bernard Schumi. And we proposed actually with all the students to create just one billboard all together. And they were deciding basically the message. And we really like this one in a way because we were transforming totally the main facade, at least temporarily, of the building by Schumi, which was thinking the building as an accelerator of social transformation from the very beginning. This Common Places series has been exhibited in a couple of places. The first time it was fully introduced, all the cases, 44 cases, it was at the Swiss Architecture Museum in 2017, where we co-curate an exhibition entitled Forum Basel, talking about collective and public spaces. And you can see the display of the cases, and then there was a second exhibition in an image of an exhibition we did in Belgrade, kind of another display. Then for the one at SAM with the co-curated with the Cosmos architects, Andreas Ruby and Stephanie Savio, we bring other kind of ideas to the exhibition. And on this case, and you will see in the following projects, we use a lot of models, let's say ideas or by others, and we transform them in a way. We appropriate these ideas and we use them for new projects. In this case, an art piece by Mauricio Catelan, and we just in a way reclaim this idea of playing together with more people, and we designed this collective, or let's say bigger ping pong table. And then a couple of pictures of the exhibition. I will not go further on that. Then Arkenrev recently, an institution in France. And then lastly, this one in Chicago last year. It was for the Architecture Biennial, all together. Perhaps before to show you a couple of projects from the Chilean period, I would say there are 3 or 4 main ideas. The first one was the idea to build a case. So we really insist on the idea before to design. We try to build, of course, as many architects, we try to build the conditions for our projects. There is also this idea of the instead of, in a way, is to reinterpret briefs or to bring new alternatives to given brief, because briefs are written by architects or by authorities, it doesn't matter, but you have already a position, something to say there about models, how to use ideas by others for your own production, and this idea of the extra space that is quite influenced by Lacaton and Basal, of course. And again, Lina Bobardi, this idea of poor architecture, an architecture which has maximum dignities through minor and humble means. This is very, very key for us. The first project is a very kind of banal building, commercial building in the south of Chile. It was the first project we did as Plan Común. It was mainly, you see the urban condition actually. The project is mainly about one attribute, is to give back 100 square meters back to the city. So we just did reduced the footprint of the building, leaving the corner open. By doing this, actually, it's just this movement in front of the municipality and so on and so forth. By doing this, we had a very simple and banal condition, 2 identical facades, nothing very important, unless apart from this big kind of corner where you have more space to walk or to stay a little bit. This was the project, actually. It was finished in 2016 or something like this. Very, very simple, without any really attributes besides the fact to give this corner back. This was actually one of it was also very important, a competition project we did at the School of Architecture in our school. It was the first time we got a prize, so we got recognition of our ideas were well received in a way, and it was for a new building for the architecture school. And actually, and here it's quite important, the idea of instead of, because actually the brief was actually suggesting to have a building parallel to the street, let's say. And we said, meanwhile we were reviewing the brief, we said this is kind of nonsense. Perhaps we can work in the other way around, in the other orientation, and we can take advantage of transforming the existing building for the art faculty, which was somehow their future was not really clear. So we took an idea on the first side. We did this proposal alternative to the brief to change the footprint of the building, and then we translate the idea of the extra space by Lacaton and Basal to another program, right? Wrapping the full existing building. Very, very simple in its strategy in a way. By doing this wrapping, we were creating terraces all over. The weather conditions in Chile are quite interesting, quite good in a way, so you can work outside a big part of the year. And then you had this kind of ambiguity, let's say, or total, relationship in between interior and exteriors. And you can see the collages at that moment, they were really nasty, they were really rough. Then you can see the model over there. Then how these balconies or extra spaces, they were work. And in a way, this gave us actually more confidence in the way how we were approaching competitions and briefs in a way. This was a commentary by the jury. At that time was Aravena was president of the jury. Doesn't matter, this is a detail, but what we like about this the discourse is that actually he was saying, and this is something we learned by him, I will say, to find the specific question before to start designing anything. So you clarify the question and then you bring the answer, the proper answer, right? And in this case, it was about the multiplication of the intermediate space. Let's jump to another one, a stadium in the south of Chile, very banal stadium, in Osorno, and in 2015. And actually, perhaps the only thing you might find unexpected is this bar in one of the sites. As soon as we started the competition, this image came to our mind, the La Bombonera Stadium in Buenos Aires. It was built by this because they couldn't have the plots to have the 4 sites with galleries, so they did this bar in a way, and we said perhaps we can use the same kind of strategy in order to bring an extra space, a program wasn't solicited at that moment, a series of public gyms towards the city, with views towards the city, and so on and so forth. The third project is a memorial and park for Fernando Castillo Velasco and his partners. Fernando Castillo Velasco was a very important architect in Chile, a very important political figure. He was mayor, he was dean of Católica University. Well, very, very important figure. You can see him there. But and the memorial was for him, actually, for his image, for his figure, sorry. But then what is important in the case of Fernando Castillo Velasco is that he was practicing with other partners. He had 3 other partners, and they were bringing architecture of super good quality, especially on talking about collective housing during the most important period of collective housing in Chile, interrupted by the dictatorship, of course. The idea was actually to do a small memorial in the base of these towers, this housing complex developed by Castillo and his partners in Providencia district. This is a series of 4 buildings, very, very nice, by the way. And the idea was to do a small memorial. We said, like, perhaps instead to do a small memorial in the base of the towers, perhaps it's much more interesting to reclaim the towers as the monument itself, and to recognize, to give them a new a new image, or let's say to update their images, their image. So what we did actually was we proposed to crown the four buildings with the same kind of materiality, and you can see there also Costanera Center, this big tower, which is kind of the symbol of neoliberalism within the city, in a way. And we like the idea of this somehow confrontation of two, let's say, ideologies or two positions regarding how we see the world. And we were crowning these four towers in giving also some recognition to the other partners, not only the big tower for Fernando Castillo, but also the other partners understood as a group. Then we did, of course, minimal things in the base, in the ground floor, because all the effort was in this extra space we found it on top of the towers. And then on the biggest tower, we add this phrase, todo el pueblo es arquitecto, all the people is architect, which was a phrase by Fernando Castillo. So in a way, this quite literal in the sense, propaganda, architecture as propaganda, no? Let's continue. This was a project for two museums in Hungary, a photography museum and architecture museum, in the entrance of a very historical park, Liget Park in Budapest. Again, the idea, no, perhaps just before, one first thing we did, we took all the program that actually needed like good control conditions for exhibitions and so on and so forth. They were in the underground, all located in the underground, and then all the administrative programs for the team and so on and so forth in the last level. And in between, we created a kind of overscale hall that was, of course, non-solicited by the brief. And the second thing we proposed in this case as alternative of the brief was, again, they were proposing to have the feasibility studies, or the proposal we received by the brief was to have the buildings parallel to the main avenue. And we said, like, this is nonsense. We can confront each other, two buildings each other. So we create a space in between the buildings. And at one moment, there is a possibility of also collaboration in between them in the entrance of the park. I will move a little bit more fast. In this case, also we are also dealing with different scales. This is an urban design project. We got a third prize in Chile. In this case, actually, the brief was suggesting to create the most continuous surface in between the southern part of the city of Santiago and then the northern part in a very historical environment, I would say, with a lot of historical buildings. And we said this is non-realistic. Actually, we don't have the means in Chile to do this, nor the political will. So perhaps we can go for a more pragmatic view, adding this constellation of interventions around and in relationship with the existing buildings, right? They were sometimes spots for information, galleries for sports fields, children playground, and so on and so forth. This idea of the constellation we applied in other projects as well. This is a project, one of the few projects we have built already. The Museum of Architecture and Design of Ljubljana in Slovenia. They invite us to do a small exhibition in the castle, in the museum. And we proposed them with the budget actually to try to reclaim the surroundings of the museum, because this is a very big housing complex of 50,000 inhabitants called Nove Fugine. So we proposed them actually, again, dealing with models, to build a series of platforms as much as possible. After recognizing a series of interesting spots around the museum, we took these two models very, very direct. One is Comuna Fundamento by our friends Kun Malvesi. They did this in the context of Venice Biennial, blocking the main path towards the Italian pavilion in Giardini. We said, what if we take this action and we just leave it in the public space? And on the other side, the experiment, the sculptures by Carl Andre, no? The platforms are very, very simple. They are being done by concrete blocks in the core of the platform, and then normal bricks as cladding. And you have them in different spots. We built in the end 5, one next to the bus stop, one next to the river, one next to the community center, one you see is next to the community center, of course. The one that was much more used probably. And then one inside the museum also that was used as display of artworks or interventions, but also in some activities or openings and so on and so forth. Let's jump slowly through this idea of framing commons, which is the second part of the presentation, introducing some projects we have been done in France. The idea of framing commons, it has many, it can have, yeah, it has many meanings, I would say. The idea of the in-between, the idea of extra space by Lacaton and Basal, the idea of bringing something which is non-solicited, a space of freedom, which is a space of uncertainties more than things that you can clearly recognize in Excel sheets or let's say demands, requirements, conventional requirements. It can be a spatial compensation or even an added value. There was also for this discussion a very interesting input by Glenda Kapstein. She was doing a research on houses in the north of Chile, looking for these in-between spaces, somehow articulating the relationship in between the domestic environment and the total exterior, right? In quite severe conditions as in the north of Chile, right? We did one house before, actually founding Plan Común with Diego, which was the co-founder, and another friend, Claudio Baladrón. This was actually built just before we founded Plan Común, and we decided to have this name and this agenda, actually. And you can see the house. Actually, there are no corridors. You have one shared space for all the shared activities, and then a lot of bedrooms. And then in between them, there is just this open terrace. It means that if you go from your bedroom to the social spaces, you need to go outside, and then you enter back. In this way, because the weather conditions are interesting there, and you can you are allowed in a way to do this. It was also interesting for us that we were not bringing, let's say, boundaries or limits to the house. It is just an open kind of deck, an open plinth, so it can be used even when the family or the client is not there for camping or whatever. Then this idea of, very briefly, two other projects, we were dealing with this intermediate space, one house in the south of Chile. 1/3 of the house is containing all the, let's say, functions, main functions, bedroom, kitchens, and so on and so forth. Then an extra space, which is covered, and then a total open space in this case. Or in this one, a rural housing prototype done with another architect from the south of Chile, Felipe Graller. And the idea here actually was to, again, to concentrate all the functions in the center of the building, in the core of the building, leaving two sides open for appropriation and for manipulation or understand. Let's go to the phase 2. One thing to say, very important, that I didn't refer so much at the beginning of the presentation, it is really important to say that we collaborate a lot, and we do not collaborate only with consultants or whatever, with authorities, decision makers or clients, but actually, especially we collaborate a lot with architects. This is a very kind of natural way for us to learn and to, in a way, to discuss, to bring new ideas for our own process, right? So we did a lot this in Chile, but also in the French context. As soon as we arrived in France, we decided, let's try to find collaboration. This was the first one we did. Unfortunately, second prize in La Chapelle International. It was a building, a mixed-use building, including some public and private activities in the base of the building, then social housing, and then housing for sale, conventional housing. We did this one with another French practice called BAST. It was the transformation of a garage into workshop and student housing. We did this one last year, for example, with Architectes, a Catalan practice for the transformation of a vineyard in the very kind of well-recognized vineyard in the French context, and worldwide probably. And the idea was to actually to have a kind almost invisible intervention. So everything, almost all of the project is in the underground with this main room for the process of wine. And then lastly, for example, this one a recent collaboration with Supervoid from an RSL landscape architect from Italy for the museum extension in Maxi. Although it was an open competition, we were interested to collaborate with these friends, so we decided to do it. Coming back to the idea of perhaps insisting on in some ideas I was referring to, this was a project we built. It's a transformation of a house in the middle of nowhere in the south of France for a photographer in the middle of a forest, basically. You can see the main elevation here of the house. And what we did actually somehow was the idea was to transform the farm or the spot, the productive space within the house, let's say, which was of course totally closed. And by doing this series of specific openings and bringing this big terrace for the collective use of the house, right? By doing this, actually, I will not refer so much to the construction because I'm late, but actually what we really like about this project, there are two main things. On the one side is that we reduce the footprint of our intervention to the minimum in a way. We said to the client, the project is a house within the house. It's not that we will transform all of the interiors, but actually we will focus on this part, creating a new relation towards the south. And the second thing, by consequence, is that we were transforming the south facade as the new main facade of the house. You have it over there. You can see a little bit of the context. Then in the ground floor, of course, shared areas. On top, you have the studio for the photographer. Then the terrace in a very fragile condition, we have to say, with the openings and everything. Then some views and activities and things that are happening there. We also, with this idea of reducing the footprint or having a house within the house, or let's say, concentrating again the efforts and bringing some autonomy, we did this small project, a kind of showroom for Paris-Saclay, which is an institution in the south of Paris. There are many buildings by many important recognized architects in the area. It was a project launched by Sarkozy. I don't remember, around 2015 or 17 or something like this. We did this, just this box, creating a showroom and a workspace within a very weird and complex building. I will not introduce this one. Perhaps I will jump to the last part. Regarding collective housing, we perhaps just a few words. We need to know that we are, of course, you are aware of this. We live in a kind of accelerated within an accelerated capitalism all over. It doesn't matter if it's in Europe or in Latin America. This is the basic condition. There is a strong housing deficit, and lastly, there is a kind of the situation that we have many crises, political, ecological, and after pandemics also the kind of health crisis, right? And we, as I was saying before in the beginning, and this is shared by many architects. One German architect you might know, Jesko Fesser. We were talking about neoliberalism some years ago, and he was actually stating the fact that, somehow there are two things. On the one side, we are at this idea of that we are at mercy of protagonists, that they are not related to design actually, and on the second time, that actually creative practices are quite easily to be transformed, co-opted by neoliberalism. It's the way of neoliberalism acts in a way. It's super easy for neoliberalism to reclaim and to take this, to co-opt this creative thinking in a way. We can discuss, of course, about this. This is a situation in Chile, actually, coming back to the ghettos verticales and the lack of space all over. This is, of course, quite extreme. On the one side, a picture of the existing. On the second picture, there was an installation a couple of years ago by a collective of architects and students there, showing the lack of space and the minimal condition of these spaces. But the situation, you could say, is more or less the same in Paris, where you have there is a kind of dramatic lack of space for the domestic environments. So especially in pandemics was quite difficult. But then also in other parts, right? This picture is by a photograph that was taking pictures during the pandemics in Copan building in Sao Paulo, which has 1,600 and more units. It's one of the probably the biggest housing complex in Latin America. And actually you can see how the brise soleil is usually naturally as an extra space. Of course, this situation was happening before pandemics. We knew about this when we were living in Sao Paulo, but then I imagined it was somehow accelerated during the pandemics. The need to find a space which is not an interior, right? The influence and the importance, the recognition on this concept of extra space by Lacaton and Basal and Drouot is quite important, but perhaps what we are more interested, and this is might be a small difference in the way we see the situation, is that we are much more interested to bring these spaces back to the collective spaces, right? This is a project, the first worker city in Paris, actually, and you see the quality somehow of the generosity of the circulations, which are circulations, but also balconies or also small terraces, bringing somehow more a sense of community, right? I was talking before about La Col and La Borda cooperative. This cooperative in Barcelona, you might know it. It's quite generous in the volume of air for the collective areas. You have a huge atrium, but then you have also this kind of second two double height space for meetings and for bringing all the collectivity there. And actually it was quite, we interviewed them for the Canadian Centre of Architecture, and then they were referring to their own experience living in these spaces within the pandemics, how they were really used by the neighbors, using the spaces in many, many different ways. In a way, this condition of bringing, let's say, the circulations or the shared spaces to give the image of the project, we can see it a lot in other programs, not necessarily a lot in housing after the modern period. I will show you just a couple of them. I really like this one, the Sesqui 24 de Mayo by Méndez da Rocha and MMBB, where they transform a building and they create this system of ramps that goes all over the building, and it's kind of a constant traffic, but also encounters, informal encounters within the building. Or in this case, which is much more from the, let's say, the middle, the 20th century, let's say, a collective housing in Valparaíso in Chile, where you can see it, Valparaíso is quite a city informed by topography, let's say, defined by topography. And then you can see how the series of circulations and balconies are creating a bigger volume of air in between, a kind of an open interior, right? So let's jump to a couple of projects to end the presentation. The first one is this project we are doing along with Kun Malvesi and Nicolas Dorvalbori in the city in the south of Paris. It's a quite big social housing project that we normally it will start the construction site next year. It's quite important to say that the client is the RIVP, which is la Régie Immobilière de la Ville de Paris. It's a kind of real estate from the city of Paris, which is quite interesting. They are bringing social housing, at least in a model it doesn't exist really in Chile. And they are quite exemplary in looking, at least, even though it's a public institution with all the challenges, they are trying to bring kind of good conditions for developing projects, right? The site we have, it's already, you can recognize it in the picture. For the ones who know the city, it's a next hospital, San Vincent Paul, and it is next to Fundación Cartier by Jean Nouvel. And then the brief was asking for demolishing this building, even though there was some potential to keep it, as they are keeping other buildings. It was demolished. And then we proposed this complex, actually. Just a few things to say, because the process is quite long. I will say 2 things or 3 things about reinterpreting the brief. On the first side, of course, you can see it's quite dense. It's much more dense than you might like or you might expect. It's quite dense as a complex. It's quite also, with the regulation, it's quite complicated. And the idea was to open, in a way, as much as possible, our project towards the surroundings. So the first thing to say that we did actually was to create a connection in between an inner courtyard, the center of the project that actually was for the inhabitants. We decided to create this connection towards the pedestrian boulevard in the center of the hospital through the building, right? So you see, you pass through the building. The second thing that you might see here, the material is quite also in a kind of French tradition, and it's also in tune with the political will of the city or the country. Actually, concrete is not anymore super welcome. So basically, in this case, the structure is a mix. Actually, you have concrete, but then for the housing apartments, you have this stone facade, which is self-supportive, no? Self-supportive, and then an interior structure in wood. In a way, coming back to the idea of the models, it was during the competition, actually, we went to visit these two cases with our partners. We went to Cité Napoleon to try to show them that the potential of these shared spaces, and then at the same time, the robust and massive type of construction by Fernand Pouillon in Pantin, north of Paris. And then in a way, the project is somehow the result of this kind of combination, quite straightforward, right? This was the kind of the situation when we won the competition, more or less. It changed a little bit from that moment regarding the structure, but this is something else. And then the last thing to say about this project is that you can see that vertical circulations are part of the buildings, are part of the volume, sorry, and they are serving these platforms that are in between buildings, right? By doing this, actually, we were creating micro communities, let's say, dealing with a huge community of 185 apartments or families in a more careful way. So we were creating these smaller communities that were having in common, actually, this open platform. So one community is not equal to one volume or one building, but actually it's more an hybrid situation. We add more or less the 9% of extra space, space non-solicited by the brief. These were the four vertical commons, as we named them. Actually, they are just platforms shared by the vertical circulations, or you could say they are over-scale circulation, more or less. And the idea was really bring this kind of basic situation where you can have a terrace, you can have plants, you can have your ping pong table or something else. In order to ensure that these spaces will be inhabited, we went to a process of participation with the inhabitants. We discuss with them their priorities, and then we bring a couple of, let's say, infrastructure for these spaces. So it's not just a space, but actually there is some some water, some storage. There are some furniture that are somehow in connection with their requirements. And we like this. We really like this model when we are just seeing the vertical commons for an exhibition in Milan. The idea was really to imagine this as a kind of place where many things can happen. Then the other projects, you have one by Sergison Bates and Bourbous Grand from France, and the other one, Transformation by Lacaton and Basal on top, very, very dense. This idea of the vertical common, or how circulations, open circulations can serve all other spaces, we are dealing with this subject in other projects. I will not refer so much to these ones. Besides, you see the diagram, the isometry. There is the ground floor for the common area. Let's say instead of having a cafeteria in the ground floor, we decided to locate the collective space, then the vertical circulations, and then a vertical terrace, a rooftop on the lower building we were defining. This was a real estate competition. And then what interested us, it was how the project was seen and how we were taking care of the neighbors, including the surroundings, not creating higher density, creating more obstacle in a kind of narrow space, but actually give more depth, more air to keep the air. Another project, which is actually on building side, It's a small transformation of a small house, common house, a collective series of 5 apartments in Pantin in the north of Paris. This was the idea in the beginning, actually, to create just to an extension, 1-floor extension for a new apartment, and then shared space on top for all the inhabitants. Then, as soon as we went into detail to the project, we knew that the foundations were quite damaged, that it was quite difficult or quite a huge effort to keep the building. So in the end, it wasn't, the quality wasn't so clear, besides the fact that it was already existing. We did a new version of the project, which is this one. And you have small apartments and bigger as they are going up. And then on top, just a greenhouse, shared space for everyone with a terrace. The construction, and then in the meantime, we were developing the project. We said, okay, it will be by brick. And at one moment, we said, what if we reuse bricks, like taking from another place, giving a new life in our project? So we contacted a Belgian company not far from Paris. So we were doing the building. We are doing the building with reused bricks, taking in a way, posing the question of the reuse to the full facade and not only for a few furniture or small interventions within the project, right? So by doing this, we needed to test the bricks. We went to the National Scientific Center institution in France. So to comprove they are resistant in terms of assurance and so on and so forth. And then you see somehow the 2 conditions on the one side, the existing, and then how is now posed in the facade. Just 2 other projects, and then it's done. The Tour de Poissonnière, it's another transformation project. It's a transformation, very, very important, very emblematic project for us. A competition we did with the 51N4E, a Belgian practice. It's called the Tour de Poissonnière. And it is really in a kind of very extremely metropolitan condition. You have the Périphérique just next, 12 meters away, and then you have the train lines to the north. So basically, it's a quite, of course, intense place with a lot of noise, a lot of intensity. Then you see the current state of this tower, which is not very good, even though the original project was quite interesting. And then an idea by Stephanie and Alexandre came up, actually, because they had experience already building in this kind of condition next to the Périphérique, actually, is to understand that in this place, instead of actually to try to give your back to the Périphérique, to the ring road, actually, that this metropolitan condition can be a potential, right? But there is also a very important, let's say, evidence, actually. You can see on the one side, the original project by Raymond Lopez, an architect that built a lot of projects like this one, many in France, but also abroad. There is one, but these ones in Hansa Viertel. And it's the same project, the same typology that Lacaton and Basal and Drouot, they transformed 10 years ago or 11 years ago for the same institution, the Tour Guadeloupe. So, of course, we had these models very, very close. We learned from them. This is the project, actually. It was to transform, to move from social housing to student housing, to bring much more apartments. And on this, what we said, actually, we took seriously the idea of not demolish anything. So the only thing we did was to relocate the central lift to one side in order to create a northern-south connection between the north and south. And we even kept the same shafts because we don't want problems in terms of asbest or extra work, right? So in a way, we fit, in a way, the new requirements into the existing building, all compressed. It's more or less working. And then we work with the extensions. Extensions for the apartments in pairs, you can see it in blue, and extensions for the collective in green, towards the north and the south. You can see a little bit of the plans there. There are many different typologies trying to insist on the idea of collective life, apartment studios that they have a shared kitchen, for example, or this kind of interior street connecting things. The only thing we move, as I said, was the lift to one side in order to create a kind of direct connection in between north and south. Here you can see how the micro communities work in a way. We were cutting the building, the existing circulation, 3 floors each time, creating the full connections in both sides. Towards the south, a series of terraces. Towards the north, a series of greenhouses. Then you have the extension for the student housing, no balconies. All the extra surface is a kind of a workplace for study or for activities there. Then the series of double height terraces towards the south. The equipment for La Sorbonne University in the ground floor. And then the double height spaces towards the north, which are this series of vertical commons again. Towards in the lower part, we had all the program that was required by the brief, well isolated, well heated, and so on and so forth. And in the upper part is non-heated, and there is somehow activities that you can more or less do if there is cold or there is a extreme warm situation. You can go there, you know, and especially when in winter you can stay there to do sports or whatever. And in a way, we like this, let's say, this contrast. In a way, the main facade is now looking towards the north, the neglected city. Just like 2 more thoughts about this. We have the possibility 2 years ago to develop these ideas in a kind of urban design competition. So we said, okay, we will develop a series of typologies where all of them, they have a specific shared type of living condition, extra space for the collective, galleries, atriums, open platforms, and so on and so forth. And the idea was actually to see them confronted and to see how they create something more between them. And then lastly, a transformation of a garage, a competition we recently lost in Paris, unfortunately, because the place is quite amazing. It is called Grand Garage Osman, very kind of elegant and very symbolic also of the Parisian condition. Then you see here the existing building. A few things to say. You have the ramps in the center. You have this difference of level 2 sides of the building. So basically, to transform the building, it was more or less obvious we needed to demolish this part. At the same time, after visiting the site, we said, even though the brief was suggesting that we should keep only one side of the building, we said we should keep both sides because the secondary facade has a lot of quality. It brings also some coherence in the urban block, let's say. This is more or less the feasibility studies they were proposing in red. Actually, the suggestion by the brief was to do a U, which was not really working in terms of regulation, but actually we were not really convinced, actually, because we were killing one part that could be useful in the building, which is the lower part towards the south. So what we did actually was to propose another system, bigger apartments towards the street, smaller apartments towards the courtyard, connected by this in-between space, in-between circulation. By doing this, actually, we were coexisting and collaborating with the surroundings, not creating boundaries, but actually alignments and somehow, yeah, updating the volume of air in the center of the urban block. Have it here. This is the in-between condition. It's quite narrow. It's like 7 meters, 70 or something like this, almost 88 meters. And actually the condition of this, as there is a lack of light and so on and so forth, we decided to propose something which is quite translucent, quite transparent, and quite open towards the surrounding. That's it.
Thank you so much. We will now begin our round of discussion, and traditionally, we will start with some of our students from our first year that have prepared some of the questions for you, and after then, you can all just raise your hand and we will pass around the microphone with Marius. So.
Hello.
Hi.
Your presentation is on, but okay. So my question was, in regard to your work with PLAN COMÚN and your work around collective spaces, you also spoke in your presentation about social reformation and challenging the status quo in architecture. And my question was, what do you see as some of the greatest obstacles to this agenda, and what can be done about it?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much. I will say, well, it's quite interesting. I will say this is it's quite challenging, I would say. The obstacles there are, I will say, of course, I refer a lot to neoliberalism mindset, because neoliberal mindset, because this is partly because we lived with this model in Chile. But I will say also institutions are also part of the problem, I would say, because when you bring this type of ideas in sharing spaces or more, say, ambiguous spaces, have, of course, doubts in terms of maintenance, in terms of dealing with this space, who will control this, who will clean this, and they see kind of problems. They are not also, example, coming back to the vertical commons, so there is a tricky situation where these square meters, they are not transferred the surface of the apartment, which would be the obvious thing to do, bigger apartment. They are left behind. So I would say that there is an institutional situation, of course. And then I would say also, I think Ballard, writer, was talking once about, he was thinking, he very well known for fictions, but he was talking about the future. He was saying, but my fear is boredom, bored. What I see in the future is boring. This, I would say, is also a challenge, because many of the ideas we think less naively or less, in a way, straightforward way in places of research, they need a political will, they need a proper framework, institutional or social, that to be realized. I will say it has many levels. I will summarize. It's the culture. So culture, when you see economy, social, mindset, backgrounds, everything in culture and our situation, I would say have a huge opportunity as architects to try to transform this within. And I would say this is not radical. It's many practices are trying to do this, leading projects in more conventional framework. Try to subvert the situation. I would say the other possibility regarding this is self-commission, of course. Then you start doing this, and at one moment you have your own process, but this lies a lot in continuity.
So you worked a lot in Chile and in Europe as well. Are there any big differences when it comes to especially designing those common spaces?
I would say there are very important. One side, I will say, on the one side, I refer a lot to the situation in Chile, but something that so much is that Latin America is a lot more formality. By informality, there are much more happening. Chile is not the most funny country. Brazil or I don't know, other countries, but things are happening. This is part of the culture. Just meet with friends, do stuff. It seems that here is a little bit in Europe, I would say, generalizing, of course. It's a caricature, but it seems that culturally speaking, it's a little bit formal situation. In a positive term, I would say that as soon as we reestablish the practice, discourse, say, position was heard or at least attention. France. In the meantime, in Chile, the framework was totally fragile. We were just doing open sessions, launching, submitting ideas, then perhaps receiving a prize, might, but then not even close to build the project. I would say the positive term, I would say being establishing the practice. The one side was this nice coincidence that the say, even and we can discuss this with Stephanie, might be seen as at least in the image, it seems that institutions and institutions as well as support, they are more open to these events. Then reality is another situation, but at least in terms of discourse, imagine that we arrive in 2018, 2 years after or after for the election of the Biennial. The slogan was Paris en commun, Paris in common. You know? But one moment, and we have suffered also about this because the common is also already commonplace, not necessarily a good term. So in a way, I will say, just summarizing, I will say to establish the practice in Paris allow us to deal with these ideas in a more professional background. Social housing in Chile before, quite more challenging.
So in your presentation, you mentioned like your first project, which is, as you said, on architecture. And I was just wondering, like, how you got that social and educational approach. So what personally drove you to create like such a platform of discourse?
Very, very good question, I would say, because you are, and this is one of the issues I like to discuss the most with the students. When students have a huge opportunity agenda professional, which is quite hard. Didn't know that. Really happy, Diego and me were able to work with, create, to launch this project. I would say a very important figure, professor, that friend also, old friend, is Rodrigo Pérez de Arce. Rodrigo Pérez de Arce is one of the main figures in Chile. Our school. Say he was the most generous of the time and more open. I still remember, this is a kind of personal anecdote, but actually my interest of architecture and the possibility to look around was giving me have the book past this unit, right? So in a way, he was extremely open in a way to I would say, besides this radical idea of how the unit, it's interesting that he was opening many colleagues possibilities and to travel. That traveling was a good idea to learn from other issues, contexts, and so on and so forth. I have the possibility to one second year, I think, Buenos Aires for the first time. all the students. Then I went to Brasilia, research group. It's fantastic. And somehow this project is quite connected directly. But also I would say that the idea was actually so sorry, kind of natural reaction. So we were looking at El Croquis magazine, seeing like buildings empty, best picture, light condition, everything was proper. We're not convinced about this, so we actually start visiting the buildings. Very kind of not nice way. But you know, like we were seeing the situation, we were filming bathrooms, nasty details, you know, like bring this reality back, right? And I think in this term, I think the relationship architecture and video is not still well explored. Comparison with the relationship in architecture and image. And then I might also regarding the influence. I would say not necessarily social, but let's say cultural position. I would say a very important trip was actually in 2009 when we were visiting work, but also interviewing very inspiring practices for us. For example, office. Them, Nakatonan Basali, it was the first time we met them. 9, Pier Vittorio Aureli, Dogma, that bring this idea that actually perhaps the models or the influences, examples, they were being posed in Chile, they were not the right.
I want to ask just that when the question comes to social architecture, the architecture becomes so dry and so like minimal. And I was just asking, how could architecture for is it a discussion in in social architecture to develop a kind of architecture was still imposant, but also at the same time humble? Is it a discussion by you or so? Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, I will say we are. Then you can see it social, you can see it bad, maybe political, maybe good or bad. Just architecture. But what I like also to share is somehow this position, right? Position, really the input for this project. Then I'm not sure it's about minimalism, not at all. But I would say it's when dealing, for example, with social housing, you might find eventually this project minimal. Eventually is, but actually it's about focusing on the things. It's quite important. It's quite massive. It's a build. Then our special interest was in creating areas, spaces. I would say, I back to my first commentary. I would say that we'll do just architecture, like design, temporary installation. You can say you with a space architecture as well, but not necessarily sure that you need have this name social because we are not an NGO, quite conventional. Receive a commission by real estate development. Model is quite also, I would say, conventional still. For partners based in Paris, trying to get commissions, and time to time self commissions, but then not a lot of space. I would say that we had much more space in Chile. Yeah, I would say it depends on the things you want to then find the proper location.
So I think you made it quite clear that when entering a competition, you always first take a step back and look at the question that is posed. Also, maybe not follow the brief that you were given. And yeah, I think, for me, I think as a young bureau or collective, it's quite hard to deal with that financial insecurity. Let's start talking about that, and how do you deal with that? Because I think it does not raise your chances but winning if you don't like follow the
But this
question.
is a very, I would say, very important question, and it's also a very, I would say, also share attitude with Stephanie, that you just try to find thing, read the conditions, especially for us, excitement, finding something expected. Because so in the projects in Chile, the recognition each time was related to this. When we founded something out of the brief, way we were convinced that by doing this, we can bring more interesting proposals and then also have more possibilities. Then the situation is of course risky, and then suffering this several last competitions we arrived second. Practice winning second. It's quite risky, but at the same time you find, as I or find your way to sustain your practice, find your conditions. Have a much more risky approach, much more radical approach, but then you need to find the conditions. You have to work in your economy, perhaps you are not spending a lot of the center of the parts. I don't. Then I would say for us as learning process is quite important to have this like open review, because as I said, the briefs are written by architects, by other architects that might have a different background. Yes, sorry. So let's say it's at the stake, and then as building or doing these projects is a lot of effort. In a way, you need to try to do the best project you can. If you need to bypass the brief or bypass some ideas, and if you succeed, I think it's part of the game. It's not a commission. They are, in this case I show mostly competitions. We accept the risks.
So I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to ask my questions the proper way, but once I wrote a quote of Walter Benjamin that like we are like so deep in like our system, like this means like capitalism, that we can think out of it. To like if you have any thoughts or like dreams on it, I mean, on the way how you can imagine also like you, as you said, you are really unsatisfied with the neoliberal system, and you like make your work with social housing to change it. Which another way do you also see to change the situation with it? Like, I mean, not if you have any, of course, not only through like the social housing, but also in different ways, different solutions, if you have any, of course.
Very good question. And actually I need to also to clarify a thing. On the one side, I was talking about, let's say, our thoughts regarding society and culture in general. And then if you have another next week, can be another architect talking about other issues. So I was trying to just to show you a little bit of our preoccupations. it's not that I don't believe necessarily that we are trying to solve the neoliberal conditions through just one project, social housing project in Paris. It's totally nothing in a way. But we have a practice. At the same time, we have ideas regarding the world. We are dealing with an architectural practice. And then our efforts, in a way, is to try to find interesting briefs or to find interesting collaborations that allow us to talk or to refer back to this condition. If you ask me if there are other possibilities or other ways to react, there are many. I can imagine all the formats possible, like from a publication, from dealing with self-commission again, from doing your own house, like not necessarily relying in a very heavy system or infrastructure. In this case, the public infrastructure, social infrastructure in the French culture, But as we are doing, as we reestablish our practice in France, then we saw the conditions and we found that these, for example, clients or these type of projects for some specific institutions are quite interesting, of course.
Seems maybe the questions have come to an end. No, they haven't. Okay. Well, last question then, I suppose.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about like a lot of the images you showed. Seems like the aesthetic has changed a lot, and like since you practiced in Paris,
Very good.
the practice, like the appearance of those projects is like kind of similar, or like has to me it's like the same aesthetics and like offices like Puta or like La Cazova style. Yeah, like do you discuss about that in
Totally.
the office?
Totally. Very good question. I can tell you something about this. You need to understand that in Chile, we were dealing with very few means. We didn't have a small print stuff, nothing else. Our skills are also kind of limited in a way. So we were doing collages like this, the ones you saw, because we were able to produce this within the practice. That was the idea. Better or worse, there was the most direct way to build the images of our project, right? And then of course they were in tune with a kind of trend. This trend bring by office, by dogma, and by other European practices. They were exhausted by the diagrams, by the architecture in the 90s, or more conceptual kind of images that were difficult to understand. And they were just focusing in a few attributes of their project, right? And for us, we said, okay, this is interesting. We appropriate this idea and we start to develop our own way, not really necessarily clean as them, but actually we're producing the stuff there. Then there are I will say two changes. On the one side, regarding why the images are changing the condition or the aesthetic or the resolution in French context, there are two things. The first thing is local. I will say you cannot, and this can be discussed with Stephanie as well, I will say it will be, even though this is changing already with the last competitions, is that the politicians, authorities, and decision makers get used to these extremely high, well-developed, hyper-realistic images. So this is something they proud. It can share, it can be published in the media, it is well done, it speaks a very kind of goals and so on and so forth. That's on the first side. On the other side, I totally agree with you that this is actually something we discussed with Stephanie and Alexandre last year, that of course, Bruter, Moto, the collaboration with Artefactory, or with, say, from this collaboration specific, these hyper-realistic images are now, or they were, might be changing, but they are more or less the new standard in a way. So it's quite easy to, by you have the skills probably to develop nice images and so on and so forth. And at one moment you ask, why should I do a silly collage or like really trashy collage if I can do a very realistic image? Pose this question. But then as a counter, I would say trend, things are, it might happened in France at least, that these images that are very nice and very precise in reality, in terms of spatial conditions and so on and so forth, they are not necessarily welcome in all the cases anymore. We are discussing before with Stephanie, during the last competitions, they are not asking in some specific competitions, of course, many competitions. Changes are slow, but they are asking not to produce images. And my diagnosis is that images are fixing two things. Which financial position is quite unstable, that decision makers, they want to be also part of the process to arrive with the image. Like, this is the project, fully on glass. This is more or less is everything defined. I think it might be that at one moment might be not so appealing, I would say. But these are trends. As you say, as you see diagrams by OMA at one moment, they were some collages, then hyper-realistic images, then sketches, and you see some proposal just being presented by sketches that you need to build in a way before using computer, and then you use sketch as a kind of not to tell the full story. It's kind of weird, but this is an ongoing discussion.
When I ask about the aesthetics, I ask on one side about the aesthetics of the images, but also about the aesthetics of the architecture itself, like those raw concrete walls, steel beams, polycarbonate. Yeah, like
No,
I think you know what I mean.
I will say, because I forgot to say something that we discussed already with Stephanie, is that actually the risk or the situation, as I was telling before, that the common is already a kind of cliche, and not necessarily in a way, doing a statement, let's say. The situation with the images is that for me, it's kind of weird that projects start to be similar. So you can see a project by one practice and then another project by other practice in different parts of the world. But as soon as they are using the same techniques, somehow they are more or less similar, really in aesthetic. The second thing, most importantly, I will say our approach towards structure, towards the main inputs of in our project is the same. For me, the render image project done with Malvesi is more or less the same to the collage we did in Chile for our architecture school. More or less the same, personally. So in a way, when you see the garage, the beam, everything exposed, in this case is quite particular, it's a transformation. We decided to concentrate one part of the building, facade, and we leave the existing walls because it was kind of beauty. But I would say in general terms, our position didn't change how we approach structure. For example, we are using depends on the
Thanks for your lecture and many appreciations for your work. Architecture is most certainly a product, as you've shown, of politics and economy, society, geography, even religion. Is there an autonomy of architecture? Is there anything in architecture that exists outside of all those criteria?
It's a kind of huge debate. No, but really an interesting debate. Huge. I'm not sure that architecture, just answering, open the discussion. Not sure architecture needs to find their autonomy, contrary to be aligned or to be in tune with the other conditions. And architects and practitioners and practices are doing this all the time. We need to synthesize or to work with many things, many inputs. Then tell me, if you ask me, is really the need of having a contextual architecture, or shall we think our architecture really in terms of context? Not sure. And in this case, I find also interesting that you, as you are designing the project, team or whatever, is that you try to find own autonomy in order to succeed with the things that you want to succeed in. You know, your preoccupations, this is important, the autonomy. As soon as you need to have, I would say, an agenda, an agency, the practice, this can be, of course, more intellectual, but it can be very formal, very practical, very constructive in a way. And then this, I would say, you need to keep in a way, it's desirable to have a degree of autonomy, but because otherwise you can easily have someone on the table and to say, yeah, but what if we just change this? It's nothing. It's perhaps one of the
Thank you. Thank you for everyone coming, showing up, asking questions. This is the end of this lecture tonight, but the series will, of course, continue next time with a guest invited by Professor Markus Bader, Peter Heimer. So we're going to be celebrating 250 times Utica Tuesday. We thank you all. We thank you all online. And I will just hand over the word to Professor Bru once more for a little resume, and then we will go outside and hopefully have a beer in Café Kubik. If there's any more questions, you can maybe just approach Felipe in private from now on. So thank you all.
Felipe, I have a last question. Sorry. No, thank you for the lecture. For me, it's very optimistic. I like all the questions, and I think we must organize a new discussion about your question, even if I think the architect couldn't change all the world. But no, I like your question. But I think it's not a question for us, but perhaps for all of us. This question of what is a new type of communication, I think it's a question for us. And thank you to share all your obsession, conviction, I don't know in English, but all that. And what is important for me is what you show, how you put always the same obsession, conviction in your project, just to change some small thing, but very important, how you succeed to open, to share our condition of life. And my last question, if I have the time, is just I want come back in for on architecture. And my question, after 10 years of travels, interview, visiting building, what do you think of our practice, all of them? And it's not, and another question is not an addition of doubt for your practice.
Is what?
For your practice.
Yes.
Est-ce que c'est pas une addition de doute pour ta pratique de voir tout le monde?
Very, very good question. I will say we, as I said before, in a way and I will insist on this, it will be totally dishonest in a way to show you the work by us, the approach we have in Plan Común, without showing this very big evidence in a way. So I will say, we are not, at least in Plan Común, we're not the type of architects that are looking for something new, but actually just to appropriate and to mix and to create something from what we see, the surroundings. And it can be, of course, it can be a constructive solution, but it can be, I don't know, situations you see in the Seschi Pompeia by Lina Bobardi, and then you want to transfer this energy to somewhere else, I would say. So it's also important to say that although I said there are 600 videos and we are producing 100 more, and the idea is to continue at least to have 1,000, is that it's quite, I would say, quite narrow as the scene. It's not that we are bringing all and then, yeah, this is architecture, this is also architecture, and we like all the architecture in the world. It's not at all like this. You can find, I will say, you can summarize, this is for another conversation, but actually there are, I will say, just a couple of ideas. Then these are treated in different ways by different authors, but there somehow you can easily connect production in Brazil, production in Germany, for example. You can create these things. So I will say, for us, instead of actually going back to this idea of the genius, which we were reacting against, because in our school we were somehow the most important models at the school. They were like genius people, like very skilled, very good architects. And some of them, they were a little bit cryptic, not to tell the full story. On the contrary, as we see what is around, we try to work with. I'm not talking necessarily only about contemporary architecture. Not that we are looking for trends and then, yes, let's use this and then this one. But actually, we really understand this architecture as a vast field of knowledge that you can establish relationships, ideas. So I would say it's totally on the contrary, and I would like to believe, actually, tuned with Lina Bobardi's commentary on the relationship in between freedom and collectivity. I would like to believe this has been extremely helpful to shape our own position, and I will say even more, our political position, because we learn a lot about politics by some architects, actually, really politics, not only a political discourse, so like that, really like theory, or really like more intellectual approach towards politics. We learn from some of our partners, colleagues.